Hello, guys. Welcome back to the EAHC podcast. Once again, it's me, Josh, and today another very special guest. Pulling all the friends out of the hat at the moment. A lot of you who have been in the scene for a long time will know him. Maybe not the notorious, but it's Mr. Kieran Street.
Hey guys, how we doing?
So, Kieran. I was a bit stuck for a podcast this week. I know that the last one has actually gone down incredibly well with Will. We'll quickly say sorry again. That took a little while for me to release. Obviously, I am still at work full time, and there's been a few issues with the internet being really slow because everyone's at home at the moment. So it is what it is. And then I had to take it down for a small editing issue that I missed. So I had to put it back up. I also had to learn how to edit it, which was interesting. But Kieran actually messaged me, and he was like, Josh, I've really enjoyed listening to the sort of speciality or specialist podcast, and he had some input into a certain type of unit in the game, which is Cavalry. And I know Kieran did very well at our Not GT event with his all Cavalry Gondor list, which when you think about it, it sounds mental, but he's cracked it. He's got his own little niche, I guess. I've seen all mounted Gondor once before, and they didn't do very well. But I know Kieran's used it a few times and actually done quite well with it. So maybe Kieran actually very prepared, not like me. He actually made some notes, so we're going to go along with that. And we're going to talk about
an attempt to stop me rambling at every possible moment, but we'll see how well that pans out.
So, why take a horseman, Kieran?
So, in a nutshell, the reason to take a mounted cavalry model is you get mobility and damage potential. Obviously, cavalry are more expensive than infantry, and usually if you do a comparison of like for like for, say, an elite infantry unit to an elite cavalry unit or a basic one to a basic one, you'll find that's twice the points cost. So if you like, you are halving the numbers in your own army, but you're gaining the ability to run wherever you like. You dominate the battlefield with all the maneuverability that you've got. And also, when you charge, you go from having, say, the two attacks that you would have had with the front rank shield and the back support spearmen, or the two infantry models, whatever they're armed with, to being able to generate 4 attacks when you knock something down. Those are really the main, that's the main benefit in a nutshell of what you get when you take a mounted model instead of one on foot. You get that ability to have a mobile trooper, which a lot of the scenarios now require some degree of mobility. Yeah. And you also have the power to hit really hard at your selected target when you charge with them. So that's basically it. That's what you get with cavalry. Learning how to make the most of it is a lot more complicated, but that, in a nutshell, is why you're doing it.
Okay, so hypothetically, you've done your cavalry charge,
Yep.
and you've kind of hit the wall and stopped. What sort of things? So for me, just before we let Kieran carry on, for me, my own knowledge of cavalry is very limited. I've used them as one of the points we're going to get onto. With my Minas Tirith army, I've used 5 or 6, usually 6 knights with Boromir or Faramir as a sort of wraparound. So my shield wall hits their shield wall, and then my knights will wrap around and kill spear supports, and then my shield wall will win because I have more attacks. That's kind of my level of cavalry usage. I have played all mounted Rivendell Knights, but it was such a steep learning curve from never using a cavalry army to using an elite cavalry army that it kind of went okay, but not great. So, so you've, hypothetically speaking, assuming you're using an all-mounted cavalry army, you hit the shield wall, it goes wrong. What would you do, I guess?
So it all comes down to what are you up against. Like, okay. When you say that you've hit the wall and bounced potentially, so like you've done your first cavalry charge and maybe not inflicted as much damage as you needed to. What sort of circumstances are you in? Because the thing with cavalry is once you have charged, because you have the additional movement most of the time, unless the opponent's got their own cavalry or their own fast-moving units, you will normally be able to dictate when you engage because you have got the reach. You've got that 10-inch move on most infantry, which is 6 or 5, depending what other people are using. So you have picked the point where you've charged the enemy. Now, as part of what we're going to talk about, when you do that charge, you are trying to devastate that line as much as possible, because in that turn where you've charged yourself, you have the best potential to do the most amount of damage. But when the enemy, so say, survive that, or if you don't win as many fights, then you've got to have a backup plan. And that's normally having the right heroes in the right position to call the right moves so that you can charge again.
Okay.
On some occasions, you might even want to consider withdrawing. That one's very situational because it will leave you in a position where you use your entire move to get away, and some of the infantry may have already caught up, leaving you in the same position again for the next turn.
Right.
Sometimes it is worth doing, depending on what scenario you're chasing. But most of the time, when you win that priority on the second go, you're going to want to consider charging in again and doing as much damage as possible.
Okay.
I'd say that overall, the way to survive being bounced back by an enemy shield wall is by having a pretty well balanced list, having thought about how you're going to try and use it, and also having multiple aspects. If you're using an all-mounted cavalry army, it's having your entire army working as one unit to destroy your opponent. And hopefully, without sounding too pretentious, there's a great little book out there called The Art of War. If you do actually read it, it is most of it is quite obviously about actual warfare, but there are a few bits that are quite applicable to war games as well. And for no other reason, it's a good book to read. There's a principle which is summarized as if the enemy is many and you are few, which if you're using all mounted cavalry against a purely infantry force, they are going to be many, you are going to be the few. You have to be many where the enemy is few. So if you ever get a situation where you've got almost your entire army of cavalry attacking one section of the enemy line and they can't catch you because across the length of their entire line they have units that are at the other end of it who can't move quick enough to catch your cavalry. You can do a lot of damage to just a part of their army at a time, and you start taking them apart a piece at a time.
So it's like a bait and switch.
Yeah, pretty much. You're looking to try and dominate one part of the enemy force without them being able to get all of their numbers to bear on you. The moment they've done that, you're going to struggle because you just won't have the men to hold them back.
Yeah.
But if you can take them out a piece at a time, that's one less piece that you have to face. And this is where playing in a tournament setting, all things like keeping an eye on your timekeeping, like how many turns have you got left before the game's likely to end or get timed out. Having the right balance in your heroes. Have you got enough damage dealers? Have you got enough commanders with might points to give you the charges, that kind of thing?
Right.
So I mean, the first part of using a cavalry army, in my opinion, is mobility. And that's basically because you've spent all of these points to get these really fast-moving troops. 9 times out of 10, you're going to want to move. You've got the superior move, you may as well use it. There are situations where, for whatever reason, you might want to leave a cavalry unit where it is, or a number of warriors where they are. This is usually if you're using things like horse archers, who are in a really good position to shoot something.
Okay.
And obviously you don't want to necessarily want to have the modifier when you shoot, but sometimes, you're just going to fight a running battle. You're going to move every turn and shoot, even though you're shooting at a disadvantage to if you stayed still. Sometimes being 5 inches away from that enemy that's moving towards you, that's almost a full move for them.
Yeah.
You really, really draw out the number of shots that you get before you pick the place to engage. The other thing about that mobility is that, as I've sort of briefly mentioned, because you've got the superior move, it means that you can tend to pick where you want to engage the enemy, not the other way around. Obviously, this changes if the enemy has their own cavalry or fast-moving units, but if you are against a goblin horde, say, with a move of 5 inches, and you're using cavalry with 10, you can choose where you're going to charge them, not let the goblins pick where they're going to charge you. That doesn't always hold up, depending on certain scenarios. Some of the ones where you have to hold particular points, there do become points on the battlefield you have to assault because the enemy army is not going to move once it's got there. But there are ways around that as well. You could have used your superior mobility to have actually taken that area and fight the battle beyond it. So in things like hold ground, you can hold off the goblin army from actually getting to the center by having like a couple of outriders or sort of lighter units actually holding your objective, and the rest of them fighting like crazy, like 13 inches away from it.
Yeah.
Because in the last turn, you can always redeploy more men to get back onto them, but the enemy still has to fight their way through you.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And yeah, I think really that's one big concept that you have to get right if you want to use even just a small unit of cavalry with predominantly infantry, is that because you have the range and the speed, if you're not using the speed, you're not getting the most out of your horsemen. You bought them as your fast units, use them to take objectives quickly, use them in reconnoiter to slip past the enemy, past them, they can chase after you.
Yeah.
Really, go around bits of difficult terrain, get behind the enemy if you can pinch them between, say, infantry and, behind, like you've just mentioned, of using them at, say, one flank of your army to get around the other side of the enemy.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, the stuff that the enemy normally keeps behind their lines, stuff like shades, banners, spellcasters, it's a lot harder for those things to get away. So yeah, definitely you've got to make the most of the points that you put into just having the horses.
Okay.
Another aspect is by being on a horse, you've kind of almost got a spare fate point on every model, if that makes sense. This is mostly for just shooting.
Right.
Obviously, when someone shoots you while you're on your horse, there's a 4-up in the way between whether you hit the rider or the horse.
Correct.
That shot hits the rider. Obviously, it's no difference if you're on foot. If it hits the horse and kills, even if it kills the horse or if it just bounces off, you've soaked a wound. Your numbers won't have changed. You're still exactly the same number of models away from breaking as you were before. It's just that you've lost a horseman.
Very true.
So that detracts. That's not ideal because it detracts from the amount of devastation you can unleash when you actually land that cavalry charge home. But you've still got a guy on foot. And I've had a lot of games where it's really easy to kind of start getting a little bit despondent because you're losing horses quite quickly. Most of your cavalry are now on foot.
Right.
Just rank them up and fight on, even if it's a desperate fight, just fight them on as infantry. You've still got a model, they're still in it. Having the horses is pretty valuable for delivering a charge, but just because you don't have it doesn't mean you can't use it. So yeah, I mean, getting the mobility right is really key. And another thing is being able to redeploy quickly to threats as they unfold. So just as a little tangent, because I know you're fans of them on the show, I'm not going to talk about it a huge amount because it is a different wargaming system. But I use a bike army, Space Marine Ravenwing army, or used to in Warhammer 40k.
Okay.
And that was also a really fast army. And one thing that's common across both systems, Lord of the Rings and 40k, if you're using all bikes or something like that, is that you have the ability to redeploy very quickly. Yep. So if your opponent has set up expecting to fight a battle in a particular area, like you see it quite commonly, especially with new players, when you have the centre line deployment, the enemy will probably put something in the centre, one warband there, and then they'll put a warband on either flank.
Right.
And sometimes you can even get them to spread out a little bit further. If you put your warbands a little bit further apart, so say if I put my first warband down in the centre and then my other one right out on the left and my other one, even further on the right, sometimes you will respond by not by putting all of their forces together, but by putting one opposite each of mine. And at that point, you can quite happily move either of your cavalry troops together. You can move guys from the sides back into the centre faster than the enemy can respond. You can move everything you've got into the centre off onto one flank and send, 2/3 of your army against 1/3 of your opponents.
Yeah.
That ability to kind of think on your feet and just be able to respond to whatever the peril might be at a particular time with your superior mobility. I remember listening to the podcast that you did with Alistair.
Yeah.
you said at the start of the game, you know, you have to kind of in your head plan ahead and think of where you need to put these wards in like 5 turns time, because they don't have the speed to, you know, get there if you don't.
Yeah.
Like if something dramatic happens in the game, you don't have the ability to just pick up a bunch of dwarf infantry and then teleport them halfway across the board.
I mean, they're literally different spectrums, aren't they? It's like the second slowest, joint second slowest infantry unit versus like mobility. It's completely opposite ends of the spectrum almost.
With cavalry, you've got the freedom to do that. You can, if you want to, you can just move. Yeah, I mean, you can cross the board in 4 or 5 turns. So, you know, if all of a sudden you decide, I've actually set up really badly here, I don't want to fight the warband immediately opposite me.
Yeah.
Just turn tail. Doesn't matter if it takes you 2 or 3 turns to reach the army at the other end of the board. You're still going to get there before the enemy can reinforce it.
True.
And that's another key bit about getting your cavalry mobility right, is have an eye open for the open ground. So when you start a game and you've got all the different aspects of the terrain around, cavalry are really good at attacking things. They're not as good at necessarily defending things, and they also hate things like difficult ground most of the time, because it takes away your mobility advantage. You know, as soon as you enter difficult terrain like woods, you're moving 2.5 inches to the infantry models 3. They're now suddenly faster than you, unless you dismount. So it's kind of like you can definitely use pieces of terrain, like you might want to pivot around a house or something to get out of line of sight of the enemy archers or something like that, and because of your speed, you'll be able to do that. Right. Whereas it takes the enemy longer to redeploy their archers into a position where they can shoot you than it will for you to redeploy your own archers against them, if that makes sense. Again, it's all the fact that you can move faster and that you can keep the speed up while the infantry struggles to keep up. But yeah, the other thing is that if you see an enemy and they formed up with a really strong shield wall, like, you know, they might have their front rank shield, second rank spears, and then forming a nice little line between, say, 2 Lake Town houses or 2 Rohan barricades or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Trying to hit that head on is going to be very difficult in most cases. If you've got strong heroes, then yeah, depending on what it is, sometimes you will punch through and it's not a problem. But it's also the fact that because the enemy knows that you can't move around the sides, you know, their numbers, especially if they're a elite army, will count more against you. Yeah. So, you know, say if you've got a rank of elves or something with their fight 5, you know, backed up between a very, very narrow gap, you might only be able to get half the number of cavalry riders in against that. Yeah. Because your bases are bigger. So they could happily hold that for several turns and just keep reinforcing with extra troops that they bring up behind. Again, with cavalry, you paid for the speed, use it. You want to get around that. You don't just want to hit things head on. I know they do it in the movies, but you want to hit things in the front at the same time that you're hitting things in the sides. You know, if in a great ideal situation, you've not just hit the front rank, but you hit their back rank at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I did with my Knights of Minas Tirith, so.
Yeah, I mean, I've managed to pull it off a couple of times. It is very difficult because a good player will obviously see what you're doing and try and stop you. And again, it's where that mobility comes in, is that, you know, you can be seen with a cavalry unit on the flank, fire off a heroic march, all of a sudden the enemy can suddenly be surrounded on like one of their flanks or something and have limited options on how to deal with it. So yeah, it's really key to use that mobility, having paid all the points for it as well. The next bit is more to do with the damage potential when you've actually charged something.
Okay.
So most players, even the new players trying to use cavalry, I'm sure will be familiar with the idea that you charge because you get more attacks. You know, makes sense. You know, you're starting off. Most cavalry models in the game have 1 attack standard. You charge, you get an extra 1. Same if you're using heroes, whichever hero you're on, they get a bonus attack when they charge in. And then obviously when you knock something down, you do, you know, the same again. So your 2 attacks become 4. And needing to get a 5 or a 6 for a wound most of the time on, you know, 4 dice, pretty doable. When you factor in things like lances, you know, lances, in my opinion, are just great little tools for cavalry.
Yeah, they're awesome.
Yeah, I mean, But going back a while, I used to have a big issue with trying to use cavalry against dwarves because they're so high defense, it can be a struggle. And that's, they're a really good army to try and bounce cavalry off of because it's so hard to get the wind on them. But once you start including lances, they are dwarven can openers, or at least they can be when they work.
Yeah.
So, when you make your first charge of the game, again, unless the scenario calls for it, unless you're feeling incredibly confident, like I think you've got another Kieran in your EAHC league who likes to use the Riders of Theoden nest.
Yeah, I've seen Kieran Hatton kill 24 Morannons in one turn.
Yeah.
It was grim.
That's a really strong army for going head-on assault. So, if nothing else, I will say that Legendary Legion does capture that moment in the films where they just smash through untold amounts of infantry.
Yeah, it's horrific. It's horrifically good. It's fun. It's exactly from the film, but it is horrendously good. Given the +1 fight, +1 strength, 3 hero stuff for you, 3 heroics for your heroes, it's really good.
But when you set up your first charge of the game with an all-cavalry army, one thing that you're going to want to look for is the it's really hard to describe, but it's kind of the opportune moment. Mm-hmm. You only get one shot at putting that first charge in when you're fresh. Assuming that the enemy hasn't got archers that are putting pressure on you, or assuming that they haven't got their own cavalry which is chasing you. Yeah. Like, you get one turn in which you can thunder all of your perfectly ranked up horsemen into their line, dictate where all the combats are going to be, and try and do as much damage as possible. To kind of make that go well for you, most of the time, you kind of want to do it straight after the enemy has moved. So it's that, I think James Farquhar says it's better to charge when you've actually lost priority. And that's where you put your cavalry units in a position where they're, say, 7 inches away from the enemy. The enemy has 2 options. They can either stay where they are, when that opens them to being charged. They can fall back, which means that next turn you can just move up to 7 inches again. Yep. Or they can charge towards you if they're trying to bring the battle towards you, or if they're trying to get to a certain area, whichever.
I think this is a counter, a cavalry tactic, so to speak, in particular, but maybe we could talk about afterwards. We could talk about how to deal with playing it. I mean, we could do that with someone else, actually.
I mean, I have to put my thoughts to it. There's definitely a lot of vulnerabilities in the non-cavalry army as well. So when you get that first charge off, in an ideal world, you want to make sure that you win those first fights and that you generate those 4, dice to roll up and attack with. To roll up a wound with. So more often than not, you don't necessarily want to engage every single mob front row of a shield line the same way that you would with an infantry line. What you might want to do is, if you've got, say, the classic shields and then spears ranked up base to base, charge every other model with one of your riders. You won't be able to, you've got the option of charging 2 at a time or 1 at a time. It's far more valuable to take a 2-on-2, like 2 attacks versus 2 attacks, with you having the 4 dice to wound than it is trying to kill 2 models in one go, where they've got 4 dice against your 2. Because by charging that many models, you've actually decreased the odds of you winning that fight. I'm not saying don't always do it, because there will be points in a cavalry game where you're running out of time and you do need to inflict as much damage as possible, and maybe it doesn't necessarily matter if you're losing men, provided you're inflicting.
Or I guess if you've got a big killy hero on a horse, he can take on a couple of extra warriors.
Yeah, absolutely. If you've got even someone like Theoden, who gets who goes up to 3 attacks on the charge, or any of the 2 attack heroes, they can more than happily go up against 4 enemies, especially if they've got the higher fight value. If you've not got the fight value, it gets a little bit sort of more complicated in how you split those off. But yeah, definitely use your heroes as the battering rams that help break those lines. So once you've essentially want to fight, that's when you start getting the advantages if you can start killing the infantry before they've had an opportunity to kill you back.
Right.
And again, you might only get one good charge off in a game sometimes. You can be unlucky and you can lose priority and the heroic move off the turn. You've just got to do as much as you can to ensure that the first time that you hit in an area that you chose, an area that had open ground, that was open to attack from the sides, from the other cavalry units that you've got, or just, you pick the point where you're going to engage the enemy army. Right. And then after that one turn where you've made the charge, you have the choice as to whether, in the subsequent turns, to try and charge in again and just completely hammer that particular area, or to try and withdraw, pull back for a couple of turns, and then turn around and do it all again.
Right.
It can sometimes be a little bit fighty, especially if you're combining that with things like horse archers and throwing weapons and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, you're the outnumbered one. You've got fewer men. You need to make sure that you are the one who's damaging the enemy more than they're damaging you.
Just utilising the assets you're paying for, essentially.
Yeah. And this comes on to why heroes are crucially important in a cavalry list. I'd arguably say they're even more important than when you're using the wounded all infantry.
Right.
One of the most common uses of might points in the game is for a heroic move. Very rare that you see a game without one or two of those going off. That's one way to spend your might points, is by trying to move first, trying to get all those combats and those fights favourably to your side. With cavalry, because you only get the charge when you move first, of course, heroic move is your go-to action. Frequently when I've used my all cavalry armies, most of my might points go onto heroic moves.
Right.
A couple can sometimes go onto heroic marches. We'll kind of get onto situations where that can be quite useful. But yeah, for the most part, having plenty of might to do heroic moves with is really crucial.
Okay.
This kind of comes on to the way that I set up my armies, really, which is the ideal number for an all-mounted force, in my opinion, is to have, say, about one hero for every 6 to 8 riders that you've got.
Right.
There are a couple of reasons for it, but the main one is because if that hero has got 3 riders to either side of him, most of the time when he calls a heroic move, those horses will be in range. It does vary. You might say you get 5 in the space of one move in one turn, or you may have lost one of the 6 that you started with, kind of thing,
right,
after charge. But more often than not, that's the ideal distance, because when he calls his heroic, or she calls their heroic move, you'll be able to move every model that you've got in that little group or troop of cavalry. If you've also got that hero in the dead center of the formation, and they've got some will, even if it's just 1 point, it's also an opportunity to try and shrug off some of those spells like Nature's Wrath, that can knock an entire group of cavalry onto the floor in one go.
Yeah.
And it's just quite handy having that guy right in the middle, because it means that if they go to either side, they only take out 3 of your horses with that move, when they could have taken out 6.
No, that makes sense.
So yeah, that in my opinion is the ideal kind of number to have. Anything more than that, you can, if you want, you can just take one big hero like Aragorn and then fill up his warband to 18 riders. But a lot of the time, I think you're going to struggle to get 18 whole riders onto even, say, an equivalent number of 18 infantry models, because they can form up in a tighter area.
Yeah.
And if they're using terrain to anchor either of their flanks, it gets even harder, because you can only get around them on one side, or maybe you can't get past them on either side without splitting up. And as soon as you split a cavalry unit away from a hero, you're going to struggle, because you just don't have the might points in the right area. One good example was I went to the Throne of Skulls a couple of years ago, I think, with it was one of the new lists that they had before the new edition came out.
Okay.
So it was using the Dead of Dunharrow with just the King of the Dead,
right,
and the rest of the army was all Army of the Dead on foot, and 8, I don't know, even 8, might have been 6 riders of the Dead.
Okay.
So 0 might army, because back then the King of the Dead didn't even have 1 might point. the thing I found with the Riders of the Dead in that game was because they didn't have a hero with a might point, not even a single might point. It was really difficult to engage where in a way that I knew that I'd be able to inflict damage and then be able to follow it up on the next turn.
Right.
Because any particular area that I could have charged, even assuming that I wiped out every warrior that I charged, there was always a hero in range, and the next thing that would have happened would have been a heroic move, and then the remaining troops would have just swamped the cavalry that I had and dragged them down with their one attacks.
Yeah.
So if you want a kind of absolute rule, in my opinion, always keep one good hero with any strong unit of cavalry you've got. So any sort of region where you have 4 to 6 riders, have a hero there. If you've just got 1 or 2, it doesn't really matter too much. They're not going to break a line on their own, but they might be able to do something by skirmishing against like lone enemy units. So it's less important to have like a hero, piggybacking like every single cavalry model you've got. But definitely, if you started to get your numbers up to maybe 4 or 6, that's the point to have a few in.
It's interesting because Kieran plays as we've already discussed, plays the Riders of Theoden, and it's very hero heavy because of the benefits of gambling and the Theoden's death in the first round of combat, which is generally when it's used.
Yeah,
it's completely different, but
I think that one is kind of like a special case. Like this is more if you're using every other list that isn't the Riders of Theoden.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
and that's pretty much just because of the like you've just said, that special rule. It gets exponentially better with every hero you've got. So there is a lot of incentive to use that and have your line breaker turn where, okay, you charged one section of the enemy, like say the enemy's got, I don't know, a wall of Moran and Orcs, and you've only got enough men or heroes to hit one side of it. Because in that first turn, you heroic combat with every single person in line, or make a heroic strike if you're up against one of the enemy heroes, maybe.
Yeah.
But in the early turns, I'd maybe recommend using your free might to smash through as many orcs as possible. Because if you can get the orcs down to half their number in one go, like mentioned with the 24, the orcs in one turn.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter. Like after that point, you've then got all hero or almost all hero fighting half the number of orcs they started out with. The Riders of Theoden list, I think, is a special case. If you're not using that list, if you're trying to say use an all-mounted Haradrim army, an all-mounted Minas Tirith army, that kind of thing, I definitely think having a good guideline to aim for is maybe one hero for every 6 to 8 models.
Right.
Just whatever you do, make sure that your heroes stay near your warriors, because without them, your cavalry cannot be as effective as it would be if you had them. Your might points are really important. Spend them for heroic moves predominantly. Keep a few available for things like heroic march, heroic combat. Try and be cagey with your heroic combats in the sense of, like some people recommend, if you, like we've just discussed, if doing a heroic combat with all 3 heroes at once on the first turn. If you're up against a really elite army, that could be worth it because again you're knocking down their numbers quite quickly, and then it doesn't really matter if you get as many charges later because you've got more models to try and deal with it.
Yeah.
But any turn where you could have could have had a heroic move for the charge and didn't get one because you spent it on a heroic combat that didn't work, that's not ideal. So moving on to, I think, the first thing you asked me, which was what happens if you do a cavalry charge and it all goes wrong. So you've maybe charged in and not done as much damage, you've not won as many fights as you thought you were going to, and you're now looking at not being able to get away, you've been countercharged, you've lost the heroic mover.
Yeah.
So now you're just down to your 1 attack riders with their big faces, all of them facing up to potentially 4 infantry per rider.
Yeah.
Hopefully it won't ever be that bad, and that if you have chosen to charge somewhere, you have done some damage, but that is the worst case. You have to go to Plan B, and Plan B is for banner. Anything that you can do to try and make that turn where you have not got the charge go your way, you have to do. For the most part, that involves having an extra dice in the combat, and that's given to you by a banner bearer. Even the basic banner bearer is worth it. Even with a 3-inch range, that can cover a decent amount of riders, depending on what formation you've charged up against. Some of the heroes that have the inbuilt banner are unbelievable for cavalry.
Suladan's my favourite.
Suladan's a great call. Imrahil is a great one for this role. LSR.
I think Imrahil's is a 12-inch banner, is it not?
I'm not actually sure. I know Standfast is that far. So have a quick maybe. But yeah, essentially, if you can get an extra roll into that fight, it's like you've charged. It's not, because when you win the fight, you're not going to be, when you win that fight, you're not going to be rolling 4 dice, but you've still gone up from 1 attack to 2, and it's better than. For the record, Imrahil's banner is 12 inches.
Yeah, mad good.
Starting off by having banners in the right place can really help you deal with a bad turn where you have to face the enemy charge. And it is worth noting, sometimes you are going to have games where you just can't catch a break and you keep losing the priority. There are ways around it, but they mostly involve killing the enemy heroes, conserving your own might, and just using it for heroic moves. Again, it's more where you've chosen to engage. Like a good example, I had a game at Stockport a long time ago, which was up against an all-infantry Gondor army with 1/3 Rangers of Ithilien.
Nice.
And I was using all-mounted Rohan. Now, the central objective, it was not the Maelstrom one, but I think it was, what was it called? Was it Take the High Ground or something?
I don't know, mate.
You could actually deploy straight in the centre if you wanted to, or at least touching the centre line.
Oh, because you had to hold ground and... Yeah.
And in this particular game, the Gondor army had deployed in the centre in one great big huddle. And to make matters worse, the central objective was in the dead centre of a piece of woodland. So if I'd moved my cavalry units into the middle of it, they wouldn't have had anything. No charge bonuses that have been moving 2.5 inches, just wouldn't have been good at all. But I went on to win this game, basically by using my archers, and every single turn targeting his rangers and cutting his rangers down before they had a chance to shoot me, or before they had a chance to say, I piled all of my archers onto one flank, managed to take out all the rangers on that side before he could redeploy his archers to cover them. And then just eventually, over the course of the 2 hours that we played the game for, just whittled him down as much as possible, and that included killing most of his heroes with archers.
Oh, nice.
It was lucky, I did have some exceptional dice rolls on certain turns that I needed, like being able to drop Faramir from a distance was really good. But that was the kind of insurance then of being able to go in and fight so close to difficult ground where I couldn't get my charges off, was the fact that even if I lost like a priority, it doesn't matter, because I've taken out his heroics. So anything he tries to do in the open ground, I can then counter. Anything he tries to do in the difficult ground doesn't really matter because I wasn't going to get my charge bonus anyway.
Yeah.
The other things that you can try and do to protect yourself are if you've got units that have got things like terror. Any infantry units that are close by that can give you things like Aura of Dismay, so things like Radagast's, Kieran. If you're not using an all-mounted army, if you have got some infantry in there, definitely make sure that your infantry is close to engage when your cavalry does. Just because your cavalry is good on the charge doesn't mean that you should try and use 6 cavalry models to try and take out the entire enemy line.
Yeah, that's the way that's my area of I've played cavalry somewhat effectively, is having a shield wall, hit a shield wall, and then having the ability to wrap around with, a few knights or a Faramir and Boromir combination, and then mopping up spearmen, and then gives your normal shield wall line the opportunity to have more dice in the fight because you're taking away spear supports, and then potentially more chance of killing. So
even if you're using something like Rohan infantry,
okay,
you know, we don't often see a lot of them in the game, but they do have the potential to have shields. Form up into a little wedge, get a banner behind them, use your shields to win his goal to tie up and hold off as many models as possible for one turn.
yeah,
Obviously, shielding isn't great either because, you know, if you win the fight, you're not going to wound anyone. But if it buys you that turn to have another go at getting a charge off, you know, it can hold off the enemy from absolutely rinsing your cavalry in one go.
yeah, definitely.
The other things to mention are if you've got any spells that cause knockdown. So stuff like if your Rivendell Knights get countercharged. If you've got someone like Arwen or Elrond who can sweep in and do a Nature's Wrath, all of a sudden, doesn't really matter. You've got one attack, they're on the floor. Regardless of what happens, they are not going to wound you. So you've bought yourself a round in which you can try and get that charge off again. Having monsters. So what I'm looking at here is like using all cavalry evil armies that are supported by fell beasts. Using, I don't think there's a lot of examples of them because it would be a yellow alliance, but if you've taken Guahir and some Eagles, maybe with some Rivendell Knights, I have played against that once. You know, you use the knockdown abilities of the monsters with things like Hurl. You can hurl in front of the, along the line that's just charged your cavalry. Again, it's the same principle. If the enemy's on the floor, they can't hurt you. So, you know, that's a really ideal situation to be in. Just a quick chat about using the two together. So, in my opinion, most infantry armies that have cavalry, or heavy cavalry armies that have a bit of infantry, I think 9 times out of, well, maybe 8 times out of 10, the benefits you get from having both are kind of better than being all one or the other. It's going to sound a little bit strange because I quite like using just all cavalry forces anyway. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with going all infantry or all cavalry. I just think by having both, you get more options.
It gives you more tactical flexibility, I guess.
If you've got just a single warband of infantry with a huge all cavalry army, it means if you do have those games where you've got to move through difficult ground or you've got to hold an area for several turns, you've got a warband that can do it. You know, you've got something that's more designed to work in that environment. If you're, you know, using just an all infantry army and you include a small fraction of cavalry, it gives you the fast moving element. You know, you're not at the mercy of other fast units, you know, stuff like Seize the Prize, which the enemy, like if they've got loads of cavalry, run straight towards. Even if you've only got 6 cavalry models yourself, if you race them forwards, it can buy your infantry enough time to get there when it matters.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's that kind of, I guess the phrase of, you know, master of all trades sort of thing is oftentimes better than master of one. By having the mix, you get the, you know, combined aspect of being able to do, you know, more often than not, you'll have a unit that's fit for the job.
Yeah.
And it's also the thing of cavalry are great at attacking and taking areas, but not always defending them, because you always want to be using your maneuverability. You know, you don't want to commit to an area that you can't hold. So once you've done your charge, get out of there. But it means that if you want to try and take objectives, you have to do it a few times if you want to really dislodge an enemy from them. Having your own infantry, you know, you can hit something with a cavalry unit and then immediately back it up with infantry. By sending them in at the sides or something, or even if all of your cavalry models die in front of where your infantry have marched up to, if that secured your objective, that can win you the game. There is like an approach of having maybe like I've seen a few people comment on it, and it's having just an all infantry army with like 2 cavalry riders in every single warband.
Yep.
I have to admit, that's never been the way I've done it, because I tend to go with, again, the one hero leading 6 to 8 models.
You'd have a hero with the infantry warband, though.
Yeah, but I think with only 2 cavalry models, it's kind of more like you wouldn't necessarily care too much about doing heroic move for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fair.
If you've just got a warband that's all mounted, it's heroic move all day long. But if you've got something like just 2 riders with a squad of 6 infantry, I'm not sure that you'd care too much about having to keep those cavalry safe. I think it's like the principle we've just talked about, like having a big hero and 6 cavalry swing around the enemy, but in like a really small scale.
Yeah.
That warband can commit and have like its, I don't know, 5 guys on foot fighting in the front, or 5 guys on foot in this 2-rank shield wall, and then round the sides of each one you send a cavalry model.
Yeah.
I think armies that suit that quite well are things like the Dead of Dunharrow, and that's mostly because their cavalry is incredibly expensive anyway. They're the most expensive cavalry in the game to still only have fight value 3 and 1 attack. They obviously do get Blades of the Dead, but yeah, they're a pretty pricey unit. So again, I think it's quite good to have a couple of those for like mobility. If you do need to try and race towards a board edge or get to the prize first and see surprise. But they're more difficult to lead because they don't have a mounted hero to go with. So I think they're good for that option. And yeah, just don't underrate banners. Doesn't matter if it's just a single banner bearer, like the standard one that can be passed from trooper to trooper, or if it's a named hero who has a banner effect. Those banners will really help you win fights, regardless of whether you're on foot or mounted.
Yeah.
So moving on to using an entirely all-mounted army. As we've kind of discussed, you're going to be outnumbered. There's no getting around that. Unless you're up against some incredibly elite force, where the infantry cost almost as much as your cavalry.
Or another all-mounted army, I suppose.
Yeah, or against... so I fought a few engagements of Rohan versus Rivendell Knights. They can be quite fun battles. You're going to be outnumbered, so you've got to make use of those first 2 things, which is mobility, attacking where you're many and where the opponent is few, and making the most of the charges that you land home, either through getting your heroes to do the heavy lifting, or by just picking your fights to the extent of it doesn't matter if you only engage half of the enemy line, as long as you guarantee you get that kill, because if you do that 5 times, that's 5 less models that can countercharge you on the next turn.
True.
It's all about sort of trying to whittle down the numbers before you're hurt. The other thing as well is, be flexible. Just because, I think we've already spoken about it, but just because you've set up in a particular way or particular area doesn't mean you need to commit straight away. I think I mentioned this in my own review of the Not GT. It can be a bit frustrating for some of your opponents when you start dancing around the table or maybe kiting a little bit with horse archers.
Right.
But it's kind of like, so, you've got your melee Lancer cavalry unit and you're ready to charge in. But you don't quite fancy the position that you're currently in. There's too much cover for the enemy, too much ability for them to get more of their army in.
Yeah. Just
drop back a turn. Give yourself some more space, maybe lure them onto more open ground where you're more confident you can deal with all of them at once. And when I've done that, I found that, because it can take a little while to set that up, so you could have 3 turns of just maneuvering and no combat. And I have found that certain opponents get a little bit tetchy about it.
I mean, ultimately, you're playing to win the game, so if you're frustrating, as you say, it's maybe not the nicest way for your opponent to be played, so to speak, but if you're frustrating them and getting them to play your game, ultimately that's kind of what you want, right? Yeah,
I'm not saying that it's actually particularly filthy to do either. The way to look at it sometimes is that if you're using a perfectly thematic all Rohan army that has more than just like 5 heroes and a bunch of warriors,
if you've got 24 riders that have all got bows because they're allowed, well, you might as well use them.
Yeah, but it's also that thing of like your opponent had the option to take their own archers and their own cavalry. Like my Isengard force typically doesn't worry too much about going up against all horse archer Rohan because I've got crossbows. I'm not saying I win every time, but those crossbows give me reach and ability to sort of stop the Rohan just kiting me all game.
Yeah, exactly.
It's that kind of thing of, I think it's just the frustration of having to watch the cavalry dance in front of you and knowing that you can't reach them yet, but they can reach you.
Yeah.
And even if you don't have any horse archers of yourself, even if you're all melee Lancer-equipped horses. Again, you're trying to get the enemy into a position where you've got a realistic chance of taking them on, and you're not always going to be able to do that just by charging headlong at them. I know it looks really cool in the movies, and I think to an extent that's what people expect. But charging straight in head on with cavalry without a plan beyond I'm going to charge this turn is the quickest way of getting most of them killed. So
yeah, you've got to really utilize what you've paid for and be careful with what you've paid for because they're expensive.
Yeah. The other thing to watch out for is priority threats are things like enemy monsters, enemy heroes. Enemy monsters, because any time that a monster picks up one of your horsemen and throws it through 2 or 3 other of your horsemen, that's a lot of points you've just lost in horses that automatically run away.
I mean, actually, I've got a great story. I can actually talk about this from a throwing Rohan models through other Rohan models perspective.
Yeah.
At the first Ardacon, I played an all-mounted Rohan list, and when he finally did commit, I was able to use my Undying on a Fell Beast to charge 1 model, win the fight, and then hurl through, I think he went through 9 riders of Rohan. And I killed 7, which is incredibly lucky. But ultimately I knocked 7 off their horses as well. And up to that point, I've been getting absolutely ruined. But it completely switched the game around, and I was then able to go on and win. So, monsters are. I think even Kieran has said that. Kieran Hatton, he said his biggest weakness to his army in the current rendition of it, which is quite hero heavy, is still monsters because they either have a higher fight than most of the or all of the Rohan heroes, most of them, and they're harder to kill in one go. And if he's having to strike, he's not heroic combating, so he's losing that initial extra bit of momentum gained from the charge. And if he loses a fight, if he then loses a fight to a monster, the hero either dies or the hero gets thrown through the rest of his riders, and that's also a bit of an issue. So,
because the second that half of your horsemen are now on foot, you can still use them, but it's not ideal because you've lost half their points.
Yeah.
So I mean, the way to deal with monsters a lot of the time, and this is a top, from my experience and my opinion, a top tip for dealing with the Nazgul, like back when Fell Beasts used to be a thing.
Yeah. Obviously, they're a lot less prevalent now, but
it's kind of if you can get to a situation where you've got 2 heroes in on 1 monster, and you can do the tag team of heroic strike and heroic combat, assuming that you win and have managed to trap that monster and have got things like Knights of Gondor are great for this, because someone like Boromir with his banner can do a heroic strike. He's only got to get a 3 to get to 10.
Yeah.
If he's in there with Faramir or Kieran, and they do the heroic, or even just the captain who does the heroic combat, and then all the rest of the knights just put the pressure on with their lances that bump the dice up to high enough levels to try and take out something like a Mordor Troll Chieftain or a Fell Beast.
Yeah.
I think I have to guiltily say that I did this against you at East Grinstead.
You've done. You've got both of mine. You got. I had the Troll Chief and the Undying. And you got both. I had the Undying and the Witch King, and I think you got both in one turn. So.
And it was all because of being able to do that slingshot, able to trap one, do the heroic combat, get strike. I think you did. There is some risk to it because obviously you can strike up as well. But if you can pull it off, it just takes off so many points from the enemy and makes the rest of your day so much easier because now they can't hurl you off your horse.
And now there's not strike everywhere. Obviously, you pick your targets a little bit more freely, knowing that certain models can't strike back.
Yeah. I'm far more worried about having to try and deal with a Mordor Troll Chieftain up against my cavalry army than I am against a Mordor Troll. Because I know a lot of the time, it can't strike back, so you can, and it doesn't have fate and things like that, but it's just easier to take out. So, the reason to target enemy heroes is, again, it's the might principle.
Yeah, board control.
Yeah, if you can kill a hero when they've got might, that's 1 less heroic off that you've got to deal with and 1 more cavalry charge you might be able to make. if for no other reason than when you kill, because you're the outnumbered party, a lot of the time you're never going to wipe out the enemy. It's actually a lot easier to aim for breaking them. And then if you've done enough damage to their heroes, they're running out of people to stand fast with.
Yeah.
Especially, and that sometimes can also be where the hit and run thing comes in. So if you've managed to charge a particular area and maybe your hero's killed like a goblin captain or something like that, next turn maybe you don't need to fight the rest of the goblins. If you've got priority, you could just run off. Redeploy to another section. If you can hit another part of the enemy line before those goblins catch up, that just leaves them hanging in the wind if they need to suddenly start making courage tests if they're close to breaking or something like that.
Yeah.
So again, I think one of the big things with using cavalry is having a really open mindset about being able to change your plans at the drop of a dice. It's not always the way to play it because sometimes you do need to commit to certain actions and see them through. But yes, if you see an opportunity, go for it. You've got the speed to take it.
Yeah.
Have we already talked about terrain? So
I was talked about avoiding conflict in heavy built-up terrain areas without having some sort of outflank or and then maneuvering around terrain to block other people shooting.
Yeah, pretty much that again. Just when you start the game, have a really good look at the setup of the board. I'd recommend doing this regardless of what army you're using.
I mean, you should be looking at the terrain anyway, but yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you obviously if you're the all-mounted cavalry army and you've got a chance to put down an objective in domination or something, don't put it in the middle of a set of woods.
No.
If you're playing wood elves, more often than not, they're going to have objectives in the woods, but do what you can with the bits you can control and spread them out. This is another thing. If you if you're all mounted and you've got superior mobility, if you do have the opportunity to put two objectives at opposite ends of the board, put them at opposite ends of the board, put them as far away as possible from each other, because your men have got more chance of racing from one to the other than the enemy does. If you big solid infantry blocks that have got things like shades and shaman and you name it, like the little triangle. So if I was using an infantry horde against an all cavalry army, I'd try and make a block of 3 objectives as just the minimum 12 inches away from each other.
Yes,
and you can cover it. The center of that triangle to find all 3 at once, and just have to let the other 2 go, unless you've got a backup plan that can, or a fast moving unit that can do something towards the end game.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you are a cavalry army and you've got the opportunity to put pressure on them to stretch that enemy infantry army out, go for it. Put them as far away from possible as each other. So yeah, that's I think pretty much most of the things covered about sort of general kind of cavalry tactics.
So in summary, 1 hero for 6 to 8 riders.
Yep.
Use your might points for moves because it's vital potentially.
It is vital.
Have a banner.
Don't be scared of other actions. Sometimes you are going to have to march because doing so could win you a game.
I guess if you've got enough heroes, I was looking at a Rohan list with Helm, and obviously in his legion he's not allowed any other named hero. So I was looking at captains.
Yeah.
And I think captains are a little bit underrated. I know they're not as good as named heroes, obviously, but especially in that list, I think they're still very viable. You get march, as you say, you only got march or move or combat. So yeah, I think they're incredibly useful in that. If you have a lot of captains where you can you could have a specific 2 points of might, 1 on each captain or 1 for 3 of captains that you could use for marches and then still have an extra might point for a move or a combat. So.
And the other thing is, wherever possible, if you get a heroic move off and that gets you 6 extra men charging, the amount of damage those 6 extra men will inflict is usually much greater than the 1 model you would have killed with that might point, or the the turn advantage you got from heroic shoot. I'm not saying that these other things can't be used. There will be once in a blue moon situations where you're up against a load of Harrivan raiders or something, and you choose to shoot first, and that gives you the edge over them. You know, there are turns where it can happen, but at the back of your mind, always have this little ticker going. I don't mind spending a might point here, but I need to be careful with the next two because I need those heroic moves.
Right.
That for me is really the thinking behind.
So it's just resource management, but on a much higher level almost.
Yeah. I think if you're using infantry, it doesn't matter. Yeah, sorry. I think if you're using infantry, it doesn't matter if you always win that heroic move off, even though a lot of the time people spend their might that way. When you're cavalry, you know, the stakes are that much higher. So always keep might spare and handy if you can. And just the other thing I'll add is it's quite rare that this one pops up as well, but it is the reason that I managed. Well, I didn't actually win the game. I just managed to fight it to a draw. But sometimes you have to dismount, and it seems completely counterintuitive to everything we've discussed about keeping your horses alive and about having your mobility and your devastating charge bonuses and the rest. But I remember playing a game which was Seize the Prize. And the prize was, again, in the dead centre of a really big block of woods.
Right.
So it was at Stockport, and the board we were playing on was themed around being Ithilien.
Okay.
And I was up against dwarves and woses in that one.
Nice. Good thematic combination.
With my all-mounted Rohan. But the one advantage I had was that I started off the game by being able to get to the woods quicker than the enemy could. Or, I mean, the enemy could have heroic marched, but chose on the first turn to let me have my march and not bother countering. I think he was thinking in his head, oh, it's fine, doesn't matter if they get to the woods first because they still have to go through the woods.
Yeah.
And, you know, at that point, he's faster at doing that than I am. As soon as my front row of riders got to the woods, they dismounted.
Yeah, I mean, that's the classic seize the prize tactic that I used to use anyway, would be an infantry model digs up the prize and then you pass it to another cavalry model and they run away.
Absolutely, yeah. Then annoyingly, I didn't dig up having got to the prize first, so I didn't dig it up for like 4 or 5 turns. But what I had managed to do was form like a narrow wedge of like Rohan Royal Guard and Riders of Rohan, all with their shields.
Right.
Forming like a tiny little triangle over that objective.
Yeah.
So basically forming a shield wall without spears and just with a banner at the back of it. And it just held long enough for me to get the prize and hand it back to the last Rohan Royal Guard that I still had mounted, and then send him to freedom or something.
Right.
Either way, I got the prize, so I managed to swing that one. But yeah, just because you have a difficult situation where you have to take an objective in the woods, or I don't know, for whatever reason, you've tried all the other angles, you know, whatever you do, you're going to get charged. Charge on your terms, even if you have to go with a house on either side and try and fight the way through. You know, that just because there's difficult terrain that makes it harder to get a horse's base through, don't always rule out the possibility of getting there by dismounting. Sometimes I've even voluntarily dismounted a hero to get them through the right gap to where they need to be to call that stand fast or to call that heroic move, whatever it's needed, whatever has been needed at the time to win that game.
Yeah.
So yeah, always remember you can get down from the horse. Another really cheeky thing if you're using Warg Riders in Reconnoiter is you run up to the board edge, dismount, try and pass a courage test.
I've seen people do this to some success.
And then next turn you get 2 models off instead of 1.
Or if they've done it with 3 and then they've got 5 off instead of 3 or something, you know.
Or is that the Warg Marauder? Yeah, it's the Marauder, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. I think in a nutshell, that's pretty much as plain as I can put general cavalry tactics.
I think you've done well there, mate.
Hopefully that's kind of made a sense to some people listening. If there isn't anything that you haven't quite got to or that I've been a bit vague about, just put it in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it as we go.
Or we could maybe put the doc that you've used for your notes on the Facebook page. People can read it themselves.
Yeah. No, get that loaded up.
Yeah. Okay, well, we've been talking for about an hour. We've got quite a lot of questions, but I think some of them have kind of been covered already, and some of them we can quickly skim through for the Q&A segment. Bradley said, great episode with Will. Thank you very much, mate. It was a great episode. Actually, he's doing really well at the moment. Sam has asked when me and CJ did our review of the match play guide. I said Cavalry was very important for the 6 scenarios that are now available, the new 6, because they all require some level of mobility. He said Josh has mentioned a while ago that he foresees Cavalry being very important with the new scenarios now available. How many do you reckon is about right for your army as a rough ratio at, say, 600 points? And then how many would you scale up or down by for 400 and 800? I think it depends what your army is, but...
Yeah. Like anything, it's what is your army? How much are you taking? How long's a piece of string? I mean,
yeah, it's very vague, isn't it?
I think the problem is there are different styles that you can go for. So if I'm using the Return of the King Legendary Legion that doesn't have any mounted heroes, having 2 Riders in the Dead with every warband infantry I've got, I think would be preferable to say going, I want 6 to 10 Riders in the Dead, because unless you use Aragorn Heroic Marching every turn to keep up with them, it's very difficult to keep a hero with them.
Yeah.
And again, it's that thing of you get into these standoff positions where when you've got cavalry without a hero, you can't actually charge with any reliability that you're going to do anything next turn. Like, your opponent can just take the pain and then next turn win it with a heroic move, and you can't do anything to counter it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, as a rough guide,
I think it's more if it the army Sam plays mostly. He's playing Dunland a lot at the moment. He's playing. He plays everything really. Rohan, Isengard, I think. Mordor, dwarves. Dwarves obviously don't have cavalry options apart from Iron Hills.
I'd say maybe one way to think about it if you're trying to pin it in points. I normally go by number of models, but so like again, it's that thing of having a hero with 6, having a warband with 2, or just having an entire army all cavalry. But if you're trying to think about it in points, maybe go for thirds. But when I started out using Rohan, I used to go 2/3 infantry, 1/3 mounted. Right. And then because the mounted stuff did so well, I went to 2/3 mounted, 1/3 infantry, and that worked really well. I don't know why I don't use it more often, probably because I love playing all mounted, just all pure cavalry anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely start off by just thinking about a hero that you maybe want to use mounted, giving him an escort of 6 to 8. Maybe if you're using infantry, just keep it at 6. Right. One thing I've not mentioned with the whole 6 to 8 thing, very rarely do I actually commit all 8 of those riders to a charge at the same time.
Because it must be quite difficult because of the bases anyway. But
so usually it will be so my old Rohan list that I used in the last couple of editions used to have what was it? It would be something like 6 riders and Royal Guard,
right?
1 banner bearer, and potentially an outrider.
Okay.
And the outrider is normally the key model for sitting back, holding an objective because of their vanguard rule.
Yeah, yeah.
But it's similar to my Minas Tirith army that's all mounted as well. It would have 6 knights and maybe a Citadel Guard or 2. And the Citadel Guard are there because they're there to deal with like things that have terror.
Mm-hmm.
If you need to charge a terror causing model, that kind of stuff.
And they've got longbows if you want them to have longbows.
Got horse archers as well. Sometimes I still flip between spreading your archers up into different warbands so that you can cover more of the terrain at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter where the enemy goes, you still puts a particular model, you'll still be able to line up a shot at a key target.
Yeah.
And then sometimes equally you want all of your archers in one area so that you can overwhelm the enemy archers. I'm not sure there's a right or wrong. I think there's just what works for you for that one.
Yeah.
The reason I definitely split up the Citadel Guard, though, is primarily so that wherever the enemy terror quarters are, I've got some models that can deal with it. So yeah, if he's looking to try and get a fix on his points or ratio, start with a 3rd, and then see how that goes. If you scale up or down, it doesn't make a difference what level you play it at. You can play all cavalry at 350 just as well as you can do at 1,000. It really just comes down to what army you're trying to build.
Okay. Jake has commented saying, In a fiefdom's army, I can rarely get the best use out of my mounted Knights of Dalamroth. Sometimes I struggle to use them efficiently, and they are 20 points per unit. In the odd scenario where they get into combat the way I would like them, they're great. Interested to know your thoughts on them and how to use them effectively. And someone else has commented, as a fiefdom player, 800 points consists of Imrahil Forlong, a banner, 22 knights, plus a lonely archer to pad points and camp an objective. You'll never fail to hit a combat and rip things a new arsehole. Which is, I think, I've played against Knights with Imrahil a couple of times this edition, and they are incredibly good. Again, maybe it's just, I don't know how new you are as a player, Jake. I don't want to offend you by saying, it's something you're doing wrong, so to speak, but maybe it's just a case of, as Kieran has fully mentioned in this episode, maybe not charging head on straight in and initially expecting to kill everything, but maybe just being a little bit more patient and picking your fight a little bit more carefully, and then you'll utilize the fight 5 lance 2 attacks. Yeah, I think they're incredibly good. They are expensive, but they are good.
Yeah, I mean, I think with Knights of Dalamroth and mounted Black Numenorians, kind of,
they're
kind of like brothers from different sides of the war, really, because their stat lines are almost identical. The Black Numenorians have terror, whereas the Knights of Dalamroth get bonuses from Imrahil and Forlong.
Yeah.
I would say if you've got a fully mounted army of just Swan Knights, one of the harder bits is the fact that you've got less options. And what I mean by that is that you have no horse archers. You have no ability to harass the enemy without engaging in combat. So there are going to be certain matchups that are going to be a pain to deal with. Things like Shades. I hate Shades, if I haven't mentioned it before. I'm glad that they got taken down a bit. Yeah, like we've been talking about, try and not engage on anything but your terms. Try and pick the place where you can at least get some charges in on the front and the flanks. Try and hit them from all angles at once. Make sure Forlong is covering a good number. Make sure Imrahil is dead center, because you're going to need that banner effect. Especially if you have a bad turn where you lose priority, Imrahil could be the only thing that keeps a bunch of your knights in the game.
Yeah, he's very key. And Forlong, him and Forlong are great.
Yeah, no, Forlong's great. 3 wounds as well, so he's pretty durable. Does he actually have a warhorn as well now?
Without looking at a book, I'm going to say maybe.
I'll have a quick scan of that.
I don't know, actually. I'm not 100% sure, but I think he's really good still. So, especially for his points, it's pretty cheap.
Heavy armor, sword, war spear. So he's got a lance too, and warhorn.
Yeah, there you go. Quality.
No terror stopping those Knights of Dalamroth, Jardim. The other thing to think about is if you are struggling to use like an all-mounted army of Dalamroth, try allying in Gondor with Knights of Minas Tirith. If you go for Boromir and Imrahil together, that's a pretty fearsome combination. But even if you don't want to, go that expensive, try putting Faramir in with some cheaper knights. It might give you some extra numbers if you're finding that you're just being too heavily outnumbered. Again, Citadel Guards are pretty good, like mounted, but I know that they're not the easiest models if people are beginners or anything. If you're trying to use Dalamroth with Dalamroth infantry, then what we've been discussing right at the start, use a small number, say 6 knights or so, and swing them in like a pendulum around whatever anchor of infantry you've got. If you're using the phalanx with the guys, men-at-arms with pikes, have Imrahil in the center of your pike block, and then swing the cavalry into the side of that, because his 12-inch banner will still reach your cavalry.
I don't think you should ever encourage anyone to put Imrahil on foot, though. He's so much better on horse.
Yeah, for the sake of 20 points, he does do more damage, but equally, he's pretty good at the front of a pike block too.
Having said that, I've played a Dalamroth list with Imrahil on foot, with knights on foot, and then... Sorry, we're cutting each other off. I've played Imrahil on foot with knights on foot, with men at arms behind, and that was also pretty horrible.
Yeah.
So
if you want the best of both worlds, have Imrahil mounted and just make sure that he is the keystone between where your infantry join combat and where your cavalry swing in as well.
yeah.
If you've got everything in that's fighting in range of Imrahil, you're doing well with these things. Man, Imrahil is so good. The only reason I don't use him more is because I still haven't painted him up.
Oh god, that'll be a interesting Gondor Imrahil combination. Would be horrible. CJ has, is it a question or is it? It has put a question mark. Cavalry with fight 3, never worth it, except for maybe Wild Riders. Also, cavalry at strength 3 with no modifiers. Well, I mean,
by modifiers, I assume he means things like lancers.
I assume so. Yeah.
Yeah. So for the first part of the question, riders with fight 3 never worth it. The fight 4 really helps if you've got a way of getting that into the army. I think it's important to heavily consider it, but I don't actually think it's that much of a big deal sometimes.
I guess it also depends what you want your cavalry to be used for. Like,
So,
if they're purely to grab objectives or run off the board, then it doesn't matter what fight value they are, because they're not going to be in a fight if you're playing them.
So stuff like Rohan Outriders, you don't want them in combat unless you're running out of men and you need to plug the gaps. Most of the time you just want them to hang near an objective, shoot a few things. I'm not saying you can't send them in, because like everyone else, they get their charge bonuses and they can be effective. But again, it's not the end of the world.
If you're fighting a fight 2 goblin army, then fight 3 is perfectly fine. So.
But the other, you've got the other extreme as well. Like when you're fighting elves, or anything with fight 5 and above. It's like, it doesn't really matter if you're a Knight of Gondor with fight 3.
No.
It can be really helpful having fight 4. There are a lot of armies out there that are fight 4, like Urukai. Corsairs are fight 4 standard nowadays, aren't they?
Across the board, yeah.
So I definitely don't undervalue fight 4 troops, but I don't necessarily think it means that fight 3 troops become worthless. I think you maybe use more fight 4 troops than you do fight 3, and that if you've got an army with both, then again, you're getting this thing of you've got the best of both worlds. But yeah,
it also depends on what bonuses you get from your, like Boromir's banner gives your cavalry fight 4. Theoden, when you charge in, gives your Rohan fight 4.
Imrahil knocks
Swan Knights up to fight 5.
Yeah, they're within 3 inches, I think, of them.
I think it might be 6, actually.
Oh, wow.
Again, I could be wrong, and it could be 3. I never look. I'm just... it could be 3. Probably 3. I mean, it was a 12-inch banner, though, so it could be 6.
Yeah, breaking news. Kieran decides to abandon Rohan and go to Landlock. It is 3 inches.
Oh, there you go. I mean, that's still 3 bases, though, pretty much. So
well, maybe a little bit less because you're mounted, but no, actually 3 either side. Yeah. You're talking about 3 riders. It's still pretty good.
Yeah.
On to the second part of the question. This was about being strength 3.
Yeah, with no modifiers.
Most of the cavalry in the game is strength 3. Actually, no, that might not be right. But there are a lot of strength 3 options.
I mean, if you charge and win a fight, you're getting a modifier anyway because you're knocking down.
Yeah.
It's not really a modifier, but it's more dice to kill.
Rohan had their strength bonus, so they've only got that this edition. But I've been to the GT twice with an all-mounted Rohan army that didn't have strength 4, just strength 3 across the board. Aside from heroes, of course. But yeah, I've managed to win games with strength 3 riders before. So yeah, there's definitely no problem with having strength 3. Don't think that's an issue whatsoever. Don't let it put you off.
I mean, if you've got more dice to win the fight and then more dice to kill, doesn't matter. So
yeah,
obviously it's a little bit of a hindrance, but
yeah, but I mean, maybe it's just because I'm familiar with using strength 3 troops. Like I still haven't tried out Rohan this edition with strength 4.
Potentially strength 5 if you've got axes.
Oh yeah, true. I always forget about special strikes too.
Yeah.
But yeah, don't let it put you off. Even the humble Paradrome Raider with bow.
War spear.
Okay. But they don't come with those as default, do they? I think they're optional.
What, the war spear?
Having said that, yeah, I think so. For a Paradrome Raider, because I think there are some models still that only have those, like the old metal ones.
I don't know. I might have to get a book out. Wait there.
I mean, 9 times out of 10, I don't really see why.
Did you get to the book before me?
This is so good for charging cavalry. Yeah, the war spear is optional for 1 point.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
But yeah, to be honest, if you've not taken the war spear or the bow, I can only assume you've taken that model to run straight off the board or to just be an extra model because you had enough points left over.
Yeah, I don't know why I'd take a war spear or a bow in a Harad list, but
just because I don't think I know it's got nothing to do with the question, but we haven't actually covered it. I also really highly rate throwing spears, especially in Rohan armies. They're so good. They're range 8, which means that you can throw them as far as most infantry can charge. And honest to God, it's like, they're not going to guarantee get you a kill every single time, but when they do, it's beautiful. The fact that you can move 2 inches after you throw one, if you've still got enough move left to engage another target, means they're great for line breaking. You go in, even if you kill off one model, it's one less model you've got to worry about next turn. So, absolutely big advocate for throwing spears. For the last 2 years in a row, I've gone to the except for this year, I've gone to the GT using a fully equipped Rohan list. Everything in the armies I've got a throwing spear or a bow.
Nice. Solid. Sam's had another question, and he said favourite mounted pose. As it's he hasn't specified a horse cavalry pose, but I mean, maybe we could do favourite horse, favourite something else, favourite monstrous mount or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's so many to pick from.
Yeah.
It's going to be controversial, but my favourite mounted hero horse is Theoden from Wargotha.
No, it's a good one.
It's just a really beautiful model, and you never see it because it's almost never worth not taking heavy armour with it.
Yeah, that's true. Favourite horse mounted model? Don't really use that many. I'm a big fan of Gandalf on cart. I know it's not great, but I like how it looks, and it's such a like iconic, not iconic maybe, but it's such a, for me, the Fellowship of the Ring was obviously the first interaction of Lord of the Rings that I had. I hadn't read the books or anything until I'd seen that film. And just that first scene with the fireworks is always one that I've enjoyed. I know it's such a little part of the film overall, but you know,
it captures the spirit, doesn't it?
As I think I was 10 or 11 or maybe younger when that film came out. So for me, it's just a very memorable part of the film. So.
And it's also the fact that it's just a little pony pulling like a little cart with him sitting on it. I don't know if the model actually has him smoking his pipe or not, but
I don't know.
It's a very sort of dioramic model, isn't
it? Yeah, it is definitely. If we were to go with not a horse but technically mounted, I think Radagast on Sleigh is one of my favourite models as well. Technically, it's cavalry, but.
I guess my technically not one then would be the Mimikil.
Yeah, that was my monster. That was my monster one. Yeah, I've decided for my it's my 30th birthday this year, and I'm going to get the war leader from Forge World as my present to myself. So,
nice one.
Yes.
If you want to run another new map with that, I think I've got one going spare.
Oh. All right,
why I ended up with 4 Mimikil was beyond me, but
I'll speak to you afterwards. Sam has then asked again, most memorable cavalry engagement. He says he remembers having a great game of Storm the Camp with my charge from Helm's Deep Army against Kieran's Pass of the Dead Force like 3 years ago, with a Strider Bowl in the middle. I think I lost 3-0 for being broken and 1 off breaking him.
That was a really good game.
It was against you. Okay, there you go.
My favourite cavalry engagement is probably a game that I fought at Stockport against James Bond.
Right.
And I was using all-mounted Rohan against his all-mounted Rivendell Knights.
Nice.
He also had Saruman in.
Yes.
And of all the battlefields, because one thing at this particular tournament was all of the boards had a different theme.
Right.
So you looked at them and you instantly knew, oh, great, this is like Athelion or Weathersock or, wherever. The board that we got to play our 100% cavalry engagement was on Emyn Muir,
Right.
where it's all just like broken up with rocks and cliffs and stuff. It was like the hardest place you could ever try and take a cavalry army to.
And then you had two of them, didn't you?
But to be fair, neither one of us was at a disadvantage because any disadvantages from the bottlenecks in the terrain were shared because we were all cavalry.
Yeah.
And it was a game that I lost, but left that game thinking that was amazing. So, really didn't matter about winning or losing. It was so close and so tense. It was just a really enjoyable match. I had his 3 warbands to his 2 and a wizard. He'd set up in a place to shoot me. I think the objective was like one in the center again or something like that.
Right.
And, I split off 2 of my warbands went straight for his archers, and the last one was led by Erkenbrand, who declared a heroic march, which he let go. Like he didn't really counter to. But it was one of those moments where I could tell I'd caught him on the flat by his reaction.
A gotcha moment.
Yeah, because the Erkenbrand's warband swept all the way around and then blocked one of the back escapes to where one of his Rivendell Knight units were.
Right.
Like because of all the rocky formations and the bottlenecks, he suddenly realised that after letting me have that heroic march, Saruman and one of his warbands was now trapped between 2 of my cavalry warbands.
Nice.
And there was nowhere to escape. The best he could do was put a ring of elves around the wizard and hope to fight his way out.
Right.
And in the end, he did manage to do that. Mostly because having committed so much to taking out Saruman, I only had Eowyn and a small number of riders left to take on his remaining warband.
Right.
And that warband eventually won and then swung back and then took the center and saved Saruman. But even having lost that, it was one of those games I walked away from knowing I actually played that pretty damn well. I know it didn't go my way, but it was a close run thing. And if I had to do it again, I don't even think there's much I'd change. I'd just try and roll better. So
fair.
It was just the fact that it was 2 cavalry armies fighting against each other. You don't often see it, but it is really fun when you manage it.
Nice. I have to say my cavalry engagements are somewhat limited, but no, I haven't really got memorable. I've been killed by cavalry memorably, but tend to forget how they go.
What did you find when you used your Rivendell Knights? Like, were there any big lessons learned you took away from using them?
Just maybe being too reluctant. So quite a little bit opposite to what you were sort of discussing with just being overly cautious, and then I think I kind of had bad matchups. Like they had monsters. I played an all-mounted Rohan army, which outshot me because he had more archers. And he played the army a bit more and was a bit more familiar with the sort of tactics involved with an all-mounted cavalry army. By all means, they're very good, but they're just very expensive. And if you're not used to playing them, it's quite a hard lesson to sort of learn whilst, at a tournament, so to speak.
I think one of the things they might sometimes struggle with is inflicting enough damage quickly enough.
Yeah,
like
I think
sorry, go on.
I think we played 600 points, and I had like 19 models, which sounds like quite a lot for Rivendell Knights, but only having captains as well. You could still strike with a captain then. It was old edition, but having a little bit of a lack of might. And as you say, if you don't shoot enough and then don't engage with everything, or not everything, but if you don't sort of engage when if you miss the opportunity to have a good charge and kill as much as you can, and then you're on the back foot, it's very difficult to sort of recover, regardless of what cavalry unit you're using. So, yeah, just more. It's just more of my own ineptitude at using a cavalry army. Really, I've had some success with the Gondor. Boromir is very good. I like Knights of Minas Tirith. I like the aesthetic. I think they're really cool. They're maybe not the best cavalry in the game by any means, but I think they're cool, and I've enjoyed using them. But to say a cavalry engagement, I don't really have one. So
I think the fact that Knight of Minas Tirith comes with a Lancer standard can take a shield for 1 point. Yeah, okay, they haven't got the best fight value, but if you stick with their army bonus, their courage is pretty good.
and they can have a banner if you need a
Depending
banner.
on how you build them, how you use them, they're solid. You know,
Yeah.
dependable.
Bradley Cottington has said, how viable do you think all-mounted Harad army could be? Would you spam raiders and cheap heroes, or would you go more elite with serpent riders? And someone sent me a message. Serpent riders and hard-hitting heroes. I could see it I could see it being potentially plausible going all shooty, or none at all. What's your thoughts?
I definitely think Harad cavalry are viable. To be honest, the thing is, if you ask me, I think any cavalry unit in the game, maybe except for things that are really expensive, I think you can make an army out of just about any of them.
The great thing about Harad is they have the same sort of thing with Rohan. You can have 50% bows and you can have 50% war spears if you're going to do the all-mounted version. In terms of would I have all cheap and all elite, I'd probably have a mix.
Yeah.
Just because I think the Serpent Riders are whatever the more elite version is fight 4.
Serpent Riders, yeah.
So you get fight 4, which is obviously we've discussed is very valuable.
Do you stick to your army bonus? Everyone's got poison weapons.
Yep. I'd have Suladan because he's awesome.
No reason not to take him.
I'd probably have a king just because he's fight 5.
Heroic March.
Depends on the points, obviously, and a chieftain again because he's got a bow, a lance. He's only fight 4, but if you're doing the ratio thing that we discussed earlier, then you can probably afford to take Suladan, a king, and a chieftain. And then if you've got the points and you can get the betrayer in there, he's not great, but he offers a little bit to the list that you would maybe lack otherwise. Or the other option is to take a Green Alliance and take a Mahud King with some camels, which I think someone else has asked further down. So,
I mean, the other thing again is if you take a Fell Beast with an all-mounted force, like so the Betrayer, not on horseback but on a Fell Beast, it's kind of like as soon as you engage in your first charge, you can try and use the Fell Beast to knock over everyone that you're fighting. Like, give or take. It all depends on how you maneuver and stuff like that. But I've never tried it, but I definitely think trying to run an all-cavalry army with the Fell Beasts could be devastating in the right hands.
Yeah,
and looking at the basic stats of most of the Haradrim stuff, you just can't miss. They're all good. Your raiders are cheap, but come with poisoned weapons. The Far Harad stuff has the Impaler special rule on its camels.
Yeah.
You pick it. It's good.
Yeah, I think it's a very underrated. Not underrated. I think a lot of people play Harad, but obviously they play it different ways to play it. I mean, I think an all-mounted Harad army would look awesome. Big Mumak, Suladan, loads of riders. It'd be well cool.
If you're trying to use a Mumakil with it as well, it's a very different dynamic to the force because the Mumakil costs so many points.
Yeah, it does.
But having said that, I mean, I've used a Mumakil once at a tournament and fought Iron Hills twice. And it's just, I mean, you know how solid Iron Hills armies are. They're just high usually, and you just kind of walk the Mumakil over them and just watch them sort of disintegrate. It's hilarious.
Yeah, then mop up with the whatever you've got left. So.
In that kind of case, the Mumakil is your battering ram. Your Mumakil is obviously your line breaker, and your cavalry are just there to support and to maneuver and to try and do whatever they can to make sure that Mumakil, goes to town on the enemy army.
Definitely. And you also might find that you get more charges that you wouldn't normally get because they're worried about the Mumak stampeding through things. So you might find that your cavalry can take fights at wouldn't normally be there because of how they've deployed or how they've moved or whatever. So,
No, absolutely.
Right, there's a running joke that you won't get, but Sam has asked again. Should all camel-mounted heroes have some way of moving 15 inches, asking for a friend? This is for Tom. Tom took Mahood to Destination Stockport last year, and accidentally gave his king's march, which they don't have. They're the only king that doesn't have it. And it's been a running joke ever since that Tom cheated because he used March with his king, which obviously they don't actually have. But yeah, they should have it.
Heroic strength or something instead.
Sorry, mate.
They have heroic strength or something instead.
Again, without cracking a book open, I have no idea. I'm really underprepared for this.
That's all right. Give me 2 seconds and that's there. The Marhood King has heroic strike and heroic strength.
There you go.
Right, if you want your march, you've got to use a tribe master.
Yeah, you're being greedy, Tom. Can the tribe master be on a camel though?
Yep.
There you go.
Some points. Other thing, we didn't really cover it, but terror causing enemies can be a bit of a pain for cavalry as well, because obviously if you can't charge them, you don't get any benefits.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing with the Far Harad lot, as long as you can get your king in, you're golden. As long as he's on random passes.
Or if you take Mountain Citadel Guard like you do, they've got bodyguard.
Yeah, yeah. Same thing for Rohan Royal Guards as well.
Yeah. Thomas Smith has asked, Serpent Horde Alliance with Far Harad, what ratio of camels to Haradrim Raiders to Serpent Riders? So it's again, Tom, you've not left us points, or I guess if you're going off ratios, if you have one king with 6 camels, then you have Suladan with 6 Serpent Riders, and then you have a chieftain or a Harad king with the normal Haradrim Raiders, again 6 to 8. That kind of covers the ratios Kieran was talking about earlier.
Similar to, my style most of the time is to take a small unit of elites, like 6 or so 6 Royal Guards, 6 Camel Riders, 6 Knights of the Lamroth, you name it. They're your line breaker. So that warband focuses on getting to that ideal point where you can charge and inflict damage and leads the way. Imrical right front, Marhood King right at the front, Suladan right at the front, whatever you need. And then to try and mitigate the fact you're throwing points into those elite units, trying to take some cheaper, kind of more versatile units like Raiders. So I'd say a good mix. You want a decent number of archers in there right at the fort, but having never played Harad Cavalry, I'm not sure. Right,
there you go. Same. I've only used Suladan with the normal Haradrim Raiders, so they're still very good. But Michael Montgomery has asked, there is universal agreement that heroes should always be mounted when possible, and in some circumstances, if they can't be mounted, they should be drafted for a different hero. Do you think that means there is an overpowered element at play when choosing hero and gaining a mount for only 10 points? His example is Elrond on a horse is far greater than Elrond with an elf next to him. Therefore, it appears that the mount at 10 points is far more valuable than an elf worth the same. And should horses cost more to balance the point scheme? It's quite an interesting question, actually. I probably should have read that beforehand and maybe had a more thought about answer. But
I think, personally, it depends a lot on the army that you're taking. So, first of all, most of the time it's better to have a mounted hero than not, because if you charge, you do more damage. If you get shot by something, you've got a 4-up in the way. Unless it's a thing that just affects, like a siege weapon, that will just affect both horse and rider.
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily sure that I would ever swap out a hero just because they didn't have a horse option, unless I was taking it like when I take all cavalry armies. Obviously, I only pick heroes that have a horse option anyway.
Well, that would just make sense, though.
Yeah. If I was taking an infantry-based force or a force with just a bit of cavalry in it, I don't think I'd change one hero for another just because they had a horse option. Like, if I wanted to, say, use Runel in a Lothlorien army, I wouldn't swap him out for a Galadriel captain.
Right.
I'm trying to think of a better example. Like, I wouldn't swap out Ugluk for Sharku just because Sharku can have a Warg and Ugluk can't.
Right.
I don't think there's many. I don't think it's a way that something you should worry about when you pick your list. Pick your heroes on what the heroes are, what heroic actions they've got.
I mean, often a hero might not be able to take a horse, for instance, but they would have march or accuracy or something else that you might need in your list. And it's just about having versatility and more options available to you. Like, just picking a captain because he has a horse rather than maybe Madril, it doesn't really make sense. I mean, it could do, to be fair, like a king over Madril. I could see that, but
is the argument so? Like, for example, my Numenor army, I always take horses with Isildur and Elendil.
Mm-hmm.
But to be honest, that's basically because it gives them more range and reach. For 10 points, it's a pretty good buy. I don't think it's overcosted most of the time because it's so easy to get rid of that horse. The number of times that you've charged in, like Jon Snow, and then just watch the horse take like 3 shots from Legolas, or it's really easy to get rid of a horse in the game. Like the first combat that most of you will find when you charge in with a hero and lose a combat in cavalry charge.
Horse
the first
dies.
target's not the rider, it's the horse.
Always.
A hero. And it's because it takes out your utility and those horses got a lower defense.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't think it's overcosted. I think that there is something in that. So if you're like a warrior level hero, like Baragon's horse costs 5 points or 6 points or something.
Yeah.
Because he's not got like 2 attacks or 2 wounds. He is just 1/1. And he's got like a Might, Will, and Fate thrown in. He only pays 5 points for his horse. Let's say a Gondorian captain who pays 10.
Yeah.
You assume that's because, when you double up those attacks, Baragon just rolls 4. The captain can roll 6.
And the captain can have a lance.
Yeah. Maybe there is something in there of should 3 attack heroes pay 15? Because when they scale up, they go from was it 3 attacks to 6? No, 4 attacks.
4 to 8.
Yeah. So maybe there's something in that. In that, would you think about it more if it cost you 15 points to give like Elrond or Isildur a horse compared to 10? Only because they've got 3 attacks, so they can do more damage on the charge. But I mean, either way, the horse is going to die just as easily.
Yeah, I mean, it's just unless it's a hero horse that's got fate, which there aren't many of.
I mean, that's the horse lord thing's interesting as well, because if you're Rohan, you can spend your fate points to protect your horse.
That's true.
A lot of the time, that's worth doing, because obviously, if you're still mounted, you're doing more damage. Sometimes I've not used it. Like I've had Aemma on the last turn lose a fight, and they've killed his horse, and I've elected not to spend his fate on the horse. And that's usually because there's still attacks left to go at Aemma, and with being my leader, you want to save the fate to not. You don't want to concede a victory point on the last turn of the game.
No, of course.
So I think I don't think they're overcosted because you can get rid of them very easily. I don't necessarily think that having a horse or not having a horse is necessarily what I pick a hero on. There are probably a few examples where it's close, but yeah, I can't really think of many off the top.
Yeah. Kieran has commented saying, I've had a lot of success with all Rohan Royal Guard, hero heavy Rohan, Riders of Thale and Legion, but keep looking into a more Riders heavy list. Problem is, after I build a list, I just compare it to the Rohan Royal Guard hero list and change my mind. Can Kieran make an argument for an all-mounted Rohan list, which isn't the Legendary Legion, with lots of heroes and Rohan Royal Guard?
So I think on this one,
well, yeah, it's a
the
bit
problem
of a...
is that, frankly, the Riders of Theoden list is exceptional. The amount of damage that you can do with multiple heroes who are backed up by fearless Royal Guards is insane. Especially when I've seen it in action anyway. I do think there are arguments for not taking them. Like, I guess it's splitting it into two. The first question is, should you ever take Rohan Royal Guards, Riders of Rohan instead of Rohan Royal Guards? Because we've seen this a lot recently on the GVHL group. A lot of people have been asking, can I do things like paint up my Riders of Rohan like Royal Guards and use them instead of like having to walk out for the metal models? It is a tough one because Rohan Royal Guards are really that good. They've always been solid performers in my lists, even in previous editions. I really don't.
The issue is in that Legion, they're bodyguard, they get strength 4, they go out to fight 5.
Yeah, but they do all of that outside the Legion anyway. You get that in a standard Rohan list. They've still got the special rule and the.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the main argument, and in fact probably the only argument I can make against using Rohan Royal Guards 100%, is that bows do give you utility. There are going to be some lists out there that you want to shoot up a bit before you engage with, even with fight 5, even with strength 4. You can give Rohan Royal Guards throwing spears, but the problem is, first of all, they're a little bit more expensive than bows. I still, forgetting the cost, I still reckon take as many throwing spears as you can. I think the issue is really when you try and kite with throwing spears, it's so much tighter, the kind of distance and measurements that you've got to keep. Yeah. Because you've got to maintain that 8 inches. You've got to be in range of 8 and outside 6. So it's not actually as easy to set up as it is to set up conventional horse archers. So that's the one argument I've really got against Rohan Royal Guard, is the fact that if you use Riders of Rohan, you get the bows, and that gives you more options for a greater range of situations. Having said that,
sorry, go on. Carry on.
All I was going to say is, having said that, I haven't used a all-mounted Rohan list in the last 3 years that didn't have some Rohan Royal Guard. So I definitely think you should consider taking at least a few. Because
so you get the versatility of having some bows, but you still have the big killy beat stick as and when you need that as well, potentially.
I mean, the interesting thing is that the only change that happened with their profiles between the two is that they both got the special rule regarding Theoden.
Right.
So they got the fight value boost if Theoden's around. And presumably for regular riders. That was a replacement for the Westfold Red Shield, which used to be the staple. No one used regular riders compared to the number of people who used to take the Red Shields.
Well, you don't even see Erkenbrand anymore.
No, probably because Theoden is in ascendancy.
Yeah.
And that Riders of Theoden list is so good. But I really don't get why Riders of Rohan went up to 14 points, but regular Rohan Royal Guard stayed the same and then got their horses 1 point cheaper. I think that's why this issue exists, because they used to pay 6 points for a horse, now they're paying 5. Right. And because the regular riders went up 1 point, the difference between them now compared to what it was, like before, Rohan Royal Guard were good, but they cost you. Now they're just a little bit more expensive than regular riders, so I can understand why people are struggling to see why you bother taking riders at all. The only answer I can give is that there are games where bows come really in handy. If it's not your playstyle, to have the ability to skirt around and shoot a bit before you charge, maybe just stick with Rohan Royal Guard if it's what you know and what you like.
He's done well with it. So.
The other thing on Erkenbrand is that Erkenbrand is still really good. I think he's gone up in points a bit. He still brings a +2 Warhorn. So if you're not just using Rohan Royal Guard, then it really can help. And also, even if you are using Royal Guards, it's insurance if your leader gets killed.
Yeah, +2 courage on courage 4 is good.
And he can count as a banner. Like, pay 6 riders who are going with him an extra point. So that's 6 points that he's now a banner to them.
Yeah.
Really cannot argue against Erkenbrand. I don't know. I think the Riders of Theoden list is a very strong list because you can do so much damage with it. But it's a bit of a shame because there are some other really good Rohan Legendary Legions in there. And I just think we will get to see what they can do. It's just for now they're being completely overshadowed by the one. Stuff like Theodred's Riders, the whole army gets Swarm Protector, which is like 12-inch Fearless. What's the other one you've got? You've got Eomer's one. which is like for one turn of the game, you can have a shade effect on all of your combats that involve cavalry.
You don't get the fight value bonus from that one.
You don't. You still get the strength though.
Yeah.
But I can see why that's people were not as in favour of that. There's also one where you can take the wild men and have like you can run through terrain or something like that.
Oh, the Druiden one, yeah.
That one I actually wonder if that could be very useful at the GT where there's a lot of woodland terrain.
Mm.
You know, virtually, if anyone's never been, virtually every board has got one or two sets of Skiliath ruins, and the rest is like woods.
Yeah, Citadel wood sets, yeah.
And yeah, if you've got like some wild men, that's one little section of woods taken up by them, and then they can put their little markers down other places.
Yeah, that's true.
I think all the Rohan Legendary Legions can certainly play well. There's nothing that I've read in them to suggest that they can't do what they need to. I just think that at the moment, especially because people are using less casters from what I've seen, you're not seeing as many Fell Beasts and as Ring Wraiths and stuff like that. And because of that, I think the all-hero lists are kind of doing a bit better.
It's also that the spells that would predominantly anti-all-hero kind of don't work as well anymore. So
yeah, but I don't think they're out of the game. I just think people have shifted their attention. It would be interesting seeing something with a few spellcasters take on the Riders of Faerun. Especially if you've got something like that can target gambling out, like a good Compel. He's only got one will point.
or multiple black darts.
Yeah, black dart taken out just that way.
Yeah.
I'm thinking more Compel because it's easier to cast, and if you move him away from the units he's trying to give a mic onto, it obviously helps.
Oh, because it's at the start of the turn before you've moved, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is aimed at you, mate. Chris Dan has said, do borrow models perform better than your own?
Absolutely, every time. So I borrowed Chris's Knights for the last tournament and did well in it. I borrowed Sam Page's entire Gondor army once for the tournament that Alistair threw, which was a siege event.
Yeah.
And I ended up winning that with Sam's army. Sam's lent me his Rangers before, and his Rangers with my Army of the Dead managed to take on Damien O'Byrne's Forever list back in the times long gone. So yes, every single time I've borrowed models, they do better than the stuff I've painted myself.
There you go. Richard Boker has just made a comment about Riders of Dead being pretty good, which I don't disagree with. They're pretty good.
I don't argue that they're not good. The fact that they've got Blades of the Dead is really helpful.
Yeah.
The only hang-up I've got with them is that they're most expensive for what they do.
Mm.
I think they're maybe just a little bit overcosted. Not a huge amount, but just a little bit. And I think the other thing is it's very difficult to take a list where you've got a mounted hero who can support them.
Right.
The only exception I can think of is if you don't take the Legion, if you just take the army list, and if you ally in Aragorn in the Rangers list, mounted.
Or LSR.
Yeah, or LSR.
I've seen people take LSR on a horse with mounted dead dudes. I can't think of their name, but Rise of the Dead.
Or obviously gives you a banner effect. But yeah, you still fight value 3, and I don't know. Fight value 3 on its own is not a problem. Fight value 3 with elite, expensive cavalry might be.
Yeah.
If your experience differs, put it in the comments. Tell me how you managed to use them.
Right. Reese John has asked, best good cavalry unit that is human.
So
it's very situational, but
by best. So it'd be a good orientation model that's also from the Kingdoms of Men. So
not a Rivendell Knight, basically.
So many to pick from. It depends what you want to do. Swan Knights, best stat line. Citadel Guard are really flexible because they can be horse archers or they can be monster, targeters. You can pin things down with them.
I think points efficiently is probably a Rider of Rohan, right?
Rider of Rohan for a horse archer, probably, as loath as I am to say it, a Rohan Royal Guard for smashing into combats.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's just that points
I
difference.
think it just depends what you want. Again, it depends what you want them for in your army. I think all of the good cavalry human options are pretty viable. It is literally just depending on. It's very subjective. Like as Kieran said, Rohan Royal Guard are very good at fighting. You've got archers with throwing spears. If you take warriors of Rise Rohan, sorry, the Citadel Guard can have longbows and have bodyguards. The normal Knight of Minas Tirith is pretty cheap for a lance and shield. It's literally just dependent on what you want them to do in your list and what their role will be. So,
yeah.
Dan Edwards, already mentioned above, he has a ton of Harad Raiders. He wants to use them on mass, general tactics for them, and other defense for cavalry. I think you kind of covered that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, the defense for, if you're running a Harad cavalry army, is just something you have to get over. A bit like if you're using plastic wood elf, regular wood elves on foot.
I mean, having played a defense 4 army quite a lot now, it's just a case of if you're playing Harad Raiders, you're gonna have a lot of shooting, so you have to utilize what you've got. And then when you do pick, it's the same as my Corsairs. I have to shoot a lot, and then when I feel like I can outnumber and win the fights, that's when I charge in.
Yeah.
If you take a fight head on without really weakening up your opponent, you just have to prepare to the fact that if you don't win a fight, you probably will die.
Yeah.
The only difference is Corsairs are all fight 4, so it does help a little bit against some armies.
Things like Serpent Guard, even if they are defense 4, they're pretty offensive as well. Fight 4, War Spear and Poison, they're pretty good.
+1 to wound, rerolling ones is really good.
Mm.
James Wilson has asked, which cavalry model is your favourite? Which we've already answered, but he said, is it based on the way it looks or how it performs on the tabletop? Mine is aesthetically, but
yeah, I mean, I suppose a slightly different question rather than like a specific model. Like if I had to pick a specific warrior,
oh, true, yeah,
it would be like the standard rider of Rohan. Just because they perform really well, they look really good, especially if you paint up a whole army of them.
yeah.
I know it's an ancient model from that some people have been asking for like newer sculpts and stuff, but I love the standard kit. I think just because at this point it's nostalgic for me.
Yeah.
But also, I love the Two Towers and like all the scenes that involve just the regular riders, like that scene where Aemma shows up with Gandalf. I just love the Rohan Royal. Not the Rohan Royals, the regular riders. I mean, Rohan Royal Guards are pretty good too, but I like the regular classic rider best.
If I had to pick a cavalry model to have on mass that I prefer, from a good army perspective, I'd have to say Swan Knights. I think Swan Knights on a large scale look amazing.
Yeah.
And then if I had to pick an evil model, it would probably be Morgul Knights, which you don't see very often, but they are also really beautiful models.
Really love to see how a Morgan like this does. Like they've got Terror, stops things charging you.
I saw someone play a 700-point Morgul Knight list where they had, I think it was the Witch King and the Dark Marshal on Fell Beasts.
Yeah.
And then like 22 Morgul Knights or something like that. And they didn't do awfully with it. Like it done pretty well. I think they came like 3rd or 4th.
I think it helps if you can get a Wraith with them because it's the Harbinger stacks up with their Terror.
And the Dark Marshal gives you a banner. So
yeah. Anyway, maybe a new project.
Maybe. Pat Bertoli has asked a little detail on using a sacrificial cav screen would be interesting. The concept that you leave a loose screen of models, not necessarily cav, between you and cavalry to prevent them being countercharged. Also, which factions would you consider taking cav versus a force of mixed cav and infantry, and why? That's quite a big question. But
so the first one, in terms of using screens, the use of cavalry screens in actual warfare is a bit of a broad kind of thing, but I think for the intents of the war game, what he means is having like a small, thin, spread out line of infantry in front of like a unit of cavalry, and then when it comes to your turn, you move your own infantry units either out of the way or to the edges of like the opponent line, and your cavalry just smash through.
I think it could also mean having a sacrificial screen of infantry to take up the initial charge, and then you can charge them with your main force the next turn.
Sure. I guess because cavalry already, if you're using cavalry, you've already spent points on horses. I'd be reluctant to be too willing to do something sacrificial, if that makes sense. Like it's all relative. If if you're playing Maelstrom and you've got a unit of cavalry that have just walked on, but could be charged by what the opponent brings on after you, put an infantry screen in between. Then your infantry will take the charge, and your cavalry will sweep down and save the day, or just leave the infantry to die while they go and deal with an objective or something. Trying to use them as a screen in front is a little bit more difficult because, like most of the time, if you're up against infantry, you don't need to because you will already have the charge range.
Yeah.
So you should be at about 7 inches away. So it doesn't really matter because whatever the enemy does, they can't charge you until you charge them. Maybe there's some utility in having a loose thin infantry screen if the enemy's also got cavalry, but only if you want to pin it in place and then hit it with your own. I'd say it'd be quite situational.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you can't do it, and if you've got good stratagems you pulled off with it, let us know. But for me, it would have to be a very kind of well set up maneuver.
Yeah.
And part of the reason for that is that if the infantry in front gets engaged, so you've thrown up a loose infantry screen, it's been charged. If there's not a lot of space for you to get around your own models, you've basically got your own cavalry trap behind it. Because they won't be big enough, that their bases will be too big to move through the gaps you've left. And if you've left those gaps big enough for a cavalry model to move through, then almost any other model can move through it as well. I know it's not quite that, but there will be control runs and stuff as well. But yeah, I think it would be a little bit situational, but I'm happy to have my mind changed if people pull it up.
And also, which factions would you consider taking all cav versus a force of mixed cav and infantry, and why?
90% of the cavalry options in the game I'd consider taking a full force off, or like the different army lists. So Gondor I've done, Rohan I've done. I'm not sure pure all-mounted one knights are as capable just because they don't have any horse archers and they're quite expensive. But I'll give it a go. Harad, they've got all kinds of different options you can do with them.
Hoods, canned,
I think the ones that I definitely wouldn't consider taking an entire army of are Dunharrow.
No.
Mounted Rangers of the North, only because they pay so much for their horses now, and they get 2 attacks on foot anyway.
Right.
What about Easterlings? They're an odd one.
I've seen an all-mounted Easterling list do quite well with Camorra Fellbeast.
Yeah, I mean they've got the options, haven't they? They've got strong heroes. They've got the special rule, so mounted shield rule.
As Will said on the previous episode, Amdor is incredible.
Yeah,
the Dragon Knights are very good. You've got the War Priests.
Yeah, I think they've made the cut. They've even got a Shaman. So Give that a go at all mounted.
I mean, you do lack the shooting aspect of some of the other options, but you've also got shield wall when you're in formation, so you could charge at someone and you might lose a horse or two, but you also might not because of Fury. It's kind of broken that the Fury protects the horse as well, but it does. So,
So I don't think there's many factions out there that I wouldn't give an all cavalry, all mounted army a go with. Even
maybe Iron Hills.
Say again?
Maybe Iron Hills.
I don't do dwarves. I'm more an elf player than a dwarf player. I think that's Abbey territory.
Yeah, I don't know how well all goat right. It'd probably do quite well, to be fair. All right, moving on. Sam Palmer has asked, this is one we discussed prior, how could underpowered, underused cavalry, such as Citadel Guard, be made better without being OP? Now, the underpowered part, we had we disagree with. We think they're very viable, but they are underused.
Yeah.
Probably because of the conversion, right?
Yeah, I think if there was a Citadel Guard kit out next week, you'd see a lot more of them, like mounted. I mean,
Yeah.
I basically did a very basic conversion absolutely years ago when I mean, I'm still not great at sculpting, but I'm trying harder and harder these days. So I don't have any cloaks on mine. But honestly, I've used these guys at a few tournaments now, and they're all armed with bows. So it's really clear that they're Citadel Guard and not.
Yeah, I mean, you just chop the lance off, give them a bow, and then if you can sculpt a cape, or if you can buy a cape online pre-sculpt and it fits the model, then
Yeah.
easy. It's very easy to do. I mean, the helmet is pretty much the same.
Yeah.
It is just literally a case of weapon, and if you can put a cloak on there,
Yeah.
very easy to do.
And yeah, in terms of using them, really good. I don't think they're underpowered. I'm not even sure if I'd change much about them. Like, if you give them lances, you're maybe again in that situation of would you ever take regular Knights of Minas Tirith over a Citadel Guard?
But they still get a spear, so you can technically spear support yourself.
Only if you're dismounted. Spears
really?
only but now you can't support a cavalry model with a spear.
There you go. Maybe having the option to not have a spear then.
Yeah, that would. That's how they used to be. But in effect, it's not made any difference to my army list because.
Just take them with bows anyway.
Well, you used to pay 2 points for the bow. Now you just pay a point because you swap it for the spear.
Right.
So for the mounted archer, it's made no difference. You're just as viable as you always were.
Right. There you go. Sam has then asked again, can Rohan perform well without cavalry? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the Helm's Guard Legendary Legion is really good.
Yeah.
Especially at maybe 500, 600 points.
Yeah. Yeah, because Helm Hammerhand we haven't really spoken about, but he's the only other hero in the game now, aside from Aragorn, who has Mighty Hero.
Only in the Legion, though, I'm pretty sure.
Okay. Aragorn's a great cavalry commander because he never runs out of might points. Same Helm, need another heroic move, cool, got one in the bag as long as your leader's still alive. Even if you're running on foot, sorry, because the question was, can you do Rohan infantry? I've seen people try it. I've played against a couple of all Rohan infantry lists that mostly just spammed out throwing spears and archers. I think it's a bit closer to the podcast you did with Ali about when you were talking about how do you get around not having spears.
Yeah.
And the answer is you either pick the Legion where you do get spears.
Yeah, so that one.
And you can still use them as throwing spears, just not in the same turn.
Yeah.
Or you do what the dwarves do. You take banners, you learn when to use your shields, when to not. I have to admit, most of the time when I take Rohan infantry, it's to pin something in place for the Rohan cavalry to hit. But I still think if you practice with an all-infantry Rohan list, you'll have so many models.
It's also the ability to have, what, like Ali also said, using your heroes just to kill troops rather than go for heroes.
Yeah.
Because most Rohan heroes are very cheap for what they are. And if they're all on foot, yes, they wouldn't be as effective. But, having foot heroes that have all got 2 attacks still against most troops, you will go through them. If you've saved all those points from not having horses on everything, you probably have, for most lists, like 40 to 50, maybe 60 models. It'd be quite horrendous, actually.
No, I definitely think there's room for another successful list there. Whether it would be top tier or not, I don't know, but I don't see any reason why you couldn't take a Rohan list and do well with it, even just using infantry. You can even take a weird version of it, of doing the attack on the Black Gate, just without any of the Gondor dudes.
Yes, yeah. Men of the West, is it?
Men of the West, that's it, yeah.
Yeah.
You'd have army-wide Fearless, as long as you keep Aragorn alive. I think that'd go a long way.
Yeah. You'd have Aragorn as well, who's very good. So, and then the last question, Tom Smith has asked, due to transport, this is very tongue-in-cheek, I have a couple of cav models with only 3 legs. Is it okay to say that they move 6 inches but still get a knockdown bonus?
Yeah, why not?
Sure.
That reminds me to buy another cavalry case, actually.
Just not when you play me, Tom. You dirty, dirty man. Well, that's it, mate. That's all the questions. Yeah, thank you very much for coming on.
I hope it's been useful.
I will share Kieran's post that he sent me with his notes on the East Anglia Hobbit Community Facebook page, and I'll also obviously put out when this is going on the GBHL page and the GBH on our East Anglia page. So thanks again, Kieran. If there's anyone you guys would like me to have come on, maybe I can ask. Sorry, it's not assume that they're going to be able to join me, but if there's any topics or specific people you'd like me to ask to come on and speak about, put them in the comments below. Also, if you have any questions for Kieran, he will, as he said, he'll look through the comments and he'll reply to you as best as he can. And I can do the same as well if you want my input. Probably not on this subject, but in general. And that's it, guys. So comment, like, share, and subscribe. Like our Facebook page, which is in our channel description. And thanks for listening.
Thank you. Catch you later.